Hello everyone and welcome to another tutorial. This is Christina from Pixiedrops, and today we're going to be using a beanbag pose, or a beanbag photo, sorry, and we're going to be compositing into this backdrop. And so let's get started. First things first, I want to talk about how and why why I chose this image and how we ended up here. This particular baby was a little bit fussy, and she only let me get a few poses. She's a little bit older than I would normally photograph, and she was definitely going through a growth spurt and cluster feeding and just a little bit fussy. And so what I decided in the middle of the session was to make sure that I had some poses I absolutely knew that I could use in a compositing situation to build out a gallery that would make mom happy and make me proud of the session, and so on. So I had in my mind, because mom is a landscaper and she is absolutely in love with flowers, and she definitely loves these cherry backdrops. She had seen them before we started. I was going to try to do some of them in studio, but baby just wasn't cooperating. And so I let her know that I could still do them. And I planned specifically for this backdrop, and knowing that I could composite later, even though baby was sort of over the session. And so that's okay, because we can fix this with Photoshop. First, when I had her on this beanbag, I knew that I wanted similar tones to what was being used in the backdrop, and I also wanted to make sure to match the lighting as best I could. I do have her posed in the opposite direction of the light in the backdrop, but that's okay. It's very easy just to either flip her or flip the backdrop over. So in her image, I have the light coming from top and left, and that does tend to be my habit. I'm the most comfortable with that. And in this image, the light's actually coming from the top and the right. And so I generally tend to flip the backdrop instead of the human. It's just, again, a habit of mine, and it tends to look a little bit weird if you flip over the subject. So it's easiest to flip over the backdrop to match the lighting, and I think I'll start there. I'm just going to go to image and image rotation and flip the canvas horizontal. And so now I have matching lighting because the lighting's coming from top and left. And I know that the light is coming from this direction from a few different things here. I have a shadow falling from the side of this bench, and I have a shadow falling here, so that lets me know that the light is coming from this direction. And that will match her shadows right here coming from this direction. Before we get to the compositing, I think it's really important to tidy up baby's skin, and I've left her skin here so that we could do that together. Mom had specifically asked me to remove these red spots on her eyelids, and so I'm going to do that. And there's a little bit of red here on her back, and her foot's a little bit red from this pose. So we're going to work on the red first. And what I'm going to do is take my zoom tool and zoom in by dragging right. Maybe came in a little bit too far there. And I'm going to use the spot healing brush tool to take the red off of her eyelids. I'm using the right bracket key to increase my brush size just a little bit. And I have it on content aware here, which means wherever I select, it's going to select from around it to fill in. And that's going to take the red out pretty quickly. And any other little imperfections, dry skin, etc., is going to work on right here. Again, take the red out of this eyelid. And a little bit of dry skin on her lip there. So I'm using the space bar to move around in this image. So if you just hold the space bar, and then I'm using actually my tablet to to grab with this hand to move around the image. That's a nice little shortcut. Just going to remove a bit of the red here, and then I'm going to go in and use a levels layer to take the red out. This baby has really nice skin, though she's a little bit jaundiced. So we're going to work on the jaundice after we remove the red here. Again, I like to zoom back out to see how things are looking. So next order of business, I'm just going to add a levels layer. We're going to go into the red channel, and I'm going to remove the red. We don't want to remove it too much. Just going to lighten it up a little bit here. And I've applied it to the entire image, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to double click here and invert. And then I'm just going to come back and paint with my white brush where I want to remove that red. I'm going to turn my brush all the way up to 100%. And I'm probably going to come down to lower than 100% for her back here. This is still a little bit more red than I would like, so I'm going to use a technique that I like to use. I'm going to add a layer here, and I'm going to select the skin tone from nearby her foot, and then I'm going to come in with a very soft brush at a low opacity and flow, and I'm going to paint over her skin to match up as closely as I can with the skin on her leg. Because I have a low flow and opacity, I can build this up as I like it. And we can do that all over if we like. This is going to be up to you and up to the parents. Some parents don't want a whole lot of skin correction, and some really do. And this mom, excuse me, didn't want a whole ton of skin correction, but she did want the red from the eyelids, and so I'm going to just paint that skin tone over top of her eyelid a little bit. And I've softened a bit of the details here between her toes, so I'm going to come back to this layer, and I'm going to add a layer mask, and then I'm going to mask off. Come right back up. I'm going to mask off that skin tone from between her toes, just to make sure we have the details. Okay, I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten this down. Layer. You can flatten image here, or you can flatten over here on this panel. It's completely up to you. So we're going to work on the jaundice now. Back to the layers level, or levels layer. And I'm going to come into the blue channel. And we're just going to add a bit of pink. Well, it's going to add pink as we remove the yellow. Because babies, we don't want them to look overly yellow with jaundice. Mom let me know she had jaundice. That's how I know. Okay. So I'm liking that. I think it's a little tiny bit more pink. And this baby didn't want to do this pose as tight as I might normally do it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Puppet Warp, and I'm just going to bring her in a little bit, like bring her bum up a little bit, just to make this a little bit more of the pose I was looking for. So I'm going to flatten this out. We can merge from here, merge visible. And then I'm going to create a copy of the background layer, and I'm going to go into Puppet Warp. And what I'm going to do here in Puppet Warp is drop pins wherever I don't want to manipulate this subject, because we don't want her looking wonky. I just want to move the back end. So I'm going to drop pins all along. If you get too close, it'll give you a little notification there that you don't need another pin. Drop pins wherever I don't want movement. Face is very important. We don't want to move her face around. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to lift her up a bit. And I might even bring in this knee a little bit. Not too much, just a little bit, because there is quite a distance here. I would normally have this knee touching the elbow. Okay, I like that. But what I see here is baby's bum has gotten elongated a little bit, so I'm going to come in with the liquefy tool and I'm going to work on that. And I might change her expression a tiny bit as well, so she looks a little bit happier in here. Just going to flatten this down, and we're going to come into liquefy. And I'm in the forward warp tool here, and I'm going to make it quite big. And I'm just going to round this out a little bit. And I'm just going to grab her cheek and lift it up a little bit so she looks a little less serious. Not too much, not enough that Mom will notice, but just a tiny little bit. And I'm happy with that there. So here's before and after. She just looks a little bit more peaceful. And if she were scowling, I would remove the furrows as well, but she's pretty soft in her forehead here. So I think that the next step here, we're going to go ahead and cut her out. So to do that, I'm going to use this quick selection, and we're going to increase by using the right bracket key. And we don't have a whole lot of contrast here between baby's skin and the background, so we'll see how Photoshop does. Lower that down. Click Alt to remove a selection that we don't want. All right, so we're going to come into Select and Mask, and we're going to refine this by running along the edges and pick up those fine hairs and details. That can be a giveaway that you've used a composite, so it's important to try to keep those where you can. And I might actually use some of the backdrop layer here that she's on, because it is pink and it would make sense with the scene, but we'll see how it goes. So there we go, and we're going to output to new layer with layer mask. And I can see that it took away a little bit too much here, so we will add that back. But we're just going to pick her up and drop her in. And she's obviously quite a bit too big. I'm loving that her headband is pretty much matching this backdrop. Again, I did plan that in the session. I swapped out her headband a few different times during this pose just to make sure I had something to work with. As I said, this baby wasn't exactly thrilled about being photographed. That's okay. I'm not always thrilled about being photographed either. All right. So there she is, and as you can see, when you use quick selection, you tend to get this white line around the edges. So we're going to go to the layer mask and we're going to paint that off to make sure it's not in our final image. It's one of those things about Photoshop. She's quite a bit too bright here, but she does match this or fit in this chair quite well, and I'm really happy with that. But I think I'm going to paint back in her layer that we used here. Let me show it to you, because pink goes with this scene, and then we will have very believable shadowing. I'm just going to move her up a tiny bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and paint that back in. So I'm going to go to her layer mask and use the white brush, and I'm going to put it back. And I'm painting it where there's a layer in the background. This is a little trick I use often so that you're not creating shadows. There's already shadows when you're doing the photo, and there's no need to create believable shadows if you already have them. And that's why matching lighting is very important. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I think I'm going to hit the X key and take out a bit of that background there and here. And I went a little too far, so I'm just going to add it back. And then we have that shadow under her foot, right? That does tend to be a giveaway when you're doing compositing, is that shadow under the back foot in the bum up pose. So make sure you have that one. Going to remove this a little bit. But we have that shadow here from her elbow, which makes sense. And another thing that I like to do is come back in. I've painted it all back, the pink. And then I'm going to turn everything down, turn my brush right down, flow and opacity. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to remove it so that part of the background layer shows through, just a little bit of texture. I'm just going to build that up a little bit. But again, this way we're preserving her shadows, and then we're blending her background with the background in the backdrop that we're working with. Just a little trick that really works. You want believable when you're doing newborn compositing. They're simple and they're not flashy, but you know, simple tends to be where you can show mistakes. So you want to make sure that you're getting those little details right. Okay, I'm happy with how that looks. I really like it. I think what I'm going to do, because she is quite bright, and she's maybe a little cool, we'll see here. I'm going to add levels, and I'm going to clip it to her. And then I'm going to just bring the shadows down a bit. Not too much, that's a little too much. And I think what I'll also do is I'm going to add, you can always manipulate your backdrop. They're there for you to play with. I'm going to add a levels layer to the backdrop, and I'm going to brighten it up to match her a little bit more. Just make sure and clip it there. There we go. We have a much more believable composite. I think what I'm also going to do, what I always do, is zoom in nice and tight and make sure that this layer mask is clean, and there's a bit of a haloing here. So I'm going to come up to 100%, small soft brush, and I'm just going to brush off where I see that brightness that doesn't quite fit this scene. You can do this step whenever you like, if like when you come straight out of quick selection if you like, but I find if I'm making lighting adjustments and things like that, I like to do it near the end, because sometimes when you make a lighting adjustment you'll see something you missed that you didn't see before. So I went too far here, so I'm just going to paint it back. This is the beauty of using layer masks. If you go too far, you can always come back. And I've shot at a fairly shallow aperture, and this is much sharper than it should be. So I'm actually going to blur this a bit. I'm going to just go into the background layer and use the blur tool and paint over this bench, because it's just a little sharper than it would be. Alright, and I can see when I did that, that's leaving a little bit of a haloing on her layer, so I'm just going to paint that off. Back to the black brush, nice and soft. I'm just going to inch my way in there. You don't want really sharp, obvious transitions between her layer and the background layer. Patience is key when you're working in Photoshop. I'm on the blur. Whoopsie, this happens. Let's go back. See, patience is key. I forgot to hit the brush tool. We're going to come right down into there we go. Too far. It's back into my history palette. Sometimes I paint it back, sometimes I use my history palette. Looks like it when I went back into the history there, I erased the blur from the background, so I'm just going to add that back again, just really quickly. Alright, and we're back to her layer. Sorry about that. These things do happen. Alright, so again, I do like to zoom out and see how things are looking. And I'm pretty happy with that. I think she does look a little bit saturated in here. So I'm going to add a hue and saturation. I'm just going to desaturate her a little bit. Not too much. We don't want gray babies. Well, I don't want a gray baby. I like babies to be nice and bright, but not too bright. So just down a little bit more, little bit at a time. Make those adjustments. And I'm really liking this. So I think what I'm going to do, because I like this effect so much, I'm going to add this highlight to where the light source would have been. This is going to be the top layer, and this is going to blend everything together. I'm not going to clip it. I'm going to let it affect the entire scene. It's going to hit screen mode. And this is where the light source would have been. But I don't want it all the way up like that. I just want a little. I want it to be subtle. Lovely. And now I'm going to add a final curves layer to the entire scene. I'm not clipping it to her layer or the background layer. I'm letting it affect everything. So we get more of a seamless color toning through everything. Give you a little bit more punch there. And I'm thinking that looks really good. I think Mom's going to be thrilled. She'll never remember that baby wasn't happy. Baby looks happy and peaceful and lovely. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.